The surveys are now being handed out. People have received the surveys in paper, and the online advertising for them will begin very shortly.
Hello there, and welcome to this week's edition of the Libertarian Listener with me, Chris Wilkinson. I'm joined today by Josh Ascough, who is an economics writer for Libertarian Europe and Croydon Constitutionalists. Hello there.
Hi, Chris.
So we start off this week with the very sad news of the passing of Prince Philip, and National World summed up his achievements as the Duke of Edinburgh's award, which is something I have a personal involvement in. I only did the bronze. I never quite made it up to gold. But he was also known for his charity work, as well as being a founding member of the World Wildlife Fund, which is something I never knew. He also served in the Royal Navy in the Second World War. The Duke of Edinburgh programme, incidentally, is now available in over 130 countries and territories as part of the DofE International Award Foundation. So, obviously very sad for the royal family this week. What are your thoughts on this event?
I think it's pretty much come as a great big shock to everyone, really. I mean, I think in the back of everyone's minds, I think most people knew that at some point he was going to go, because he was consistently back and forth in hospitals. But I don't think anyone expected it to be this soon, really. As I think, obviously, it's the death of a member of the monarchy, and so it's going to come as a shock no matter what. But I think because it just came so quickly and just out of nowhere with no one expecting it, I think that's why it's been so hard hitting. I mean, I'm not really much of a fan of monarchies myself, but I mean, at the same time, I don't think that's a reason to start bashing on monarchies and all that sort of stuff. I mean, I have a lot of sympathy for the Queen and for Harry and William, because there's two young men that have just lost their grandfather, and a woman has just lost her husband as well, that she's been with for the majority of her life. So it's a huge shock, and I think it does make me and I imagine others quite worried that because the Queen was with him for the vast majority of her life, that is this going to be like a sort of a dreaded knock-on effect where the person that she's been with for the vast majority of her life, now that he's gone, she's going to be devastated, and maybe that'll have some sort of hit on her mental or emotional health, and will we see her go? I think that's something that a lot of people are probably dreading the thought of, that it's going to be a knock-on effect.
Because it's been a bit of an annus horribilis for the royal family, because we've had the Meghan Markle debacle, I suppose. Now the death of Prince Philip. It's not really shaping up to be a very good year for the royal family. Do you think that the public are going to rally around them? Do you think that perhaps some of the rifts that have been opened will, as the year progresses, find closure?
Yeah, I do think that the public at large is probably going to rally around the monarchy. I mean, yes, Prince Philip, he was a divisive character, just like most of the monarchy is. But I mean, at the same time, he was, he was loved for how outspoken he was, even if people strongly disagreed with what he had to say and the circumstance under when he said those things. People still loved him. They didn't turn on him like like large members of the public have turned on Harry. But yeah, I do think that the public is going to rally around the monarchy, and I do think it is going to heal some of the wounds from that whole situation with Harry and Meghan. I think you'll probably see that if there was any rift between Harry and William, that will probably be healed through trying to give each other comfort over losing their grandfather.
One of the things that surprised me was that Prince Philip, you mentioned that he was known for his gaffes, and God help any photographer who delayed taking a photo, for example. But it was strange to find out that he didn't really like that image of himself, yet that is kind of what he's known for among younger generations, certainly my generation. And I think that's going to be his enduring legacy. How do you think we're going to remember Prince Philip in years to come?
Um, it depends really, because I think different political strands are going to remember him differently. So, reason I say that is because I think, for example, I've only just come to the knowledge that he had quite a libertarian leaning when it came to his views on the state. And so I think you're going to find a lot of libertarians are going to develop a fondness for him, because I imagine that there are probably other libertarians out there who did not know of these anti-state views that he had, and so I think there's going to be a lot of libertarians that will have fond thoughts of him. But in terms of just the vast general public at large, I think they are going to remember him more as a supportive figure for the Queen, I think, and as really, I think they're going to remember him more as just a family man, someone that stood by his grandchildren when their mother passed away, someone that supported the Queen through all of her trials and tribulations. I think they're going to remember him primarily as a supportive family man.
Right, so the next topic of conversation is on authoritarianism, and particularly within the state. I've got a quote from Yahoo here, which is from January 2021, that says, "Some people with dark personality traits may have actually enjoyed the pandemic, according to a study. Researchers from the University of Mississippi surveyed 402 people aged between 18 and 78 and assessed them for personality attributes such as psychopathy, narcissism, sadism, and Machiavellianism. The researchers write in their paper, our findings indicate that during the initial stages of the pandemic in the United States, dark personality differentially predicted cognitive and emotional responses to the pandemic. Interestingly, sadism was associated with greater positive effect in response to the pandemic." Now, what with everything that we know about government policy in relation to the handling of the coronavirus, it does seem to me to be along the lines of someone with a dark personality in a room, pulling levers, flicking switches. We see that in evidence with lockdown, which has harmed people's mental health and their physical well-being. We see it with social distancing, because obviously we can't come into contact with each other. Do you think there's any credibility behind that study at all? And do you think that the experience that we've had over the past year now is going to be used as a precedent for future crises, which may be handled in a similar way?
Yeah, I do think there is credibility to that research. I don't even think I think it goes much deeper than just the government handling of the situation and how different people react. Because for a very long time we've had this very bizarre idea that society is the state and the state is society, that they are both the one and the same thing, and that goes back to hundreds and hundreds of years of philosophical development of liberalism being infiltrated by the progressives and the socialists, and the rise of fascism, and the Leviathan state. But that is one idea that has very much stayed prevalent, of the two, that there's no distinction between the two, they are one and the same. And so I think that being embedded in people's minds, I think it makes it so that the vast majority of people, they either try to get rid of the guilt of wanting to use force against other people by using the state to do it, so that way they can put aside their guilt of using force against other people, or they genuinely believe that force should be used against other people, but they just don't want to do it themselves because they'll get in trouble, or they think that they don't have the power personally, and so they want to use the state in the exact same way. I do think there is a lot of credibility to that, and I think that because of that deep-rooted idea of the state being society, and that it is the state's job to shape the social apparatus, I think it is going to make it so that these methods of handling any form of crisis, they are definitely going to be a continuing theme in the future.
And we've seen it as well with, people standing on their doorsteps clapping for NHS workers, for example, a very Soviet-style ritual, in which all the people can rally around. Is there a harm, therefore, that such Machiavellian personality types may rub off against people who are of a saner mind? And do you see social adaptation in that sense towards something that is darker, that is antisocial, and that is fundamentally more nasty?
I don't know. I think when it comes to like the NHS clapping, I think that's going to be something that I think that is something that is going to seep into more people's minds, and it's going to be not something that becomes a regular occurrence, but I think it's going to be something that reinforces the sort of benevolent savior mindset and view of the state itself. But because I don't think it would work in trying to seep it into, say, for example, clapping for the prime minister whenever we get a new one, because the prime minister is the savior of mankind. I don't think we'll see that sort of thing, because I think it comes more down to not necessarily, say, a form of social engineering on the part of the state. I think it could be better explained as, say, emotional emotional manipulation of the state. Because the reason I say this is because we are a very charitable country. We are a very empathetic country. We feel sympathy for people. We want to help people. And we've been continuously convinced that the only way to help people is via state mandates, via, say, for example, the NHS, that any alternative is blasphemy. And so I think the idea that I think it's going to help reinforce the idea that if you criticize the NHS, you're criticizing the very idea of helping people, and that you're some sort of sociopath. I think that is definitely going to be used to try and maybe apply some sort of social pressure on people, or try to use like some sort of like an emotional attacks to try and like bombard them with the idea that they are somehow bad people for even daring to think that the NHS is not the envy of the world, when data shows that it's not the envy of the world, it's far from it. So I think in terms of engineering the population to start clapping for government officials, I don't think that's going to happen, but it's definitely going to be used for when it comes to trying to push the idea and to push the public into different ways by using emotional manipulation of think about the NHS. Social engineering, no. Emotional manipulation, definitely.
If people don't have positive thoughts about the NHS, therefore it is a thought crime. And that sort of leads me on to another point of conversation, which is, are you surprised at just how quickly Orwellian philosophy manifested itself in reality in this situation? Because we have people glued to the telescreens being fed masses of misinformation and diversions from the truth. We see a control and censorship of the media because of the supposed crisis nature of what we're up against. Are you really surprised by this at all? Because I kind of am, and I'm kind of not at the same time. I'm quite ambivalent about it.
I've got two minds about it. On the one hand, I'm not surprised of the media's attempt to manipulate people. I'm not surprised of that at all, because I've constantly said to friends and family whenever, like, say, for example, BBC say, another 2,000 people have died from COVID-19 and another 40,000 have gotten infected, I always turn around to them and say, there's a few points that we need to make important. First, we still need to look at the percentage chance of death from COVID-19. So that's something very important to keep in mind whenever we see these numbers increase. And the other thing that I always see is they always, whenever there's an increase, they always mention the case rate increasing.
Yeah.
They'll occasionally mention the death rate as well, but they'll bombard you more with it when it comes to the case rate. And for some reason, and that puts it in people's mind that it's the case rate that we should be worried about, when in reality, you could not care less when it comes to the case rate. I mean, a good example is South Korea. South Korea's case rate, I think they're on like about double digits a day. Their highest point was about 3 digits a day. But their death rates from, I think it was mid-April, it just dropped straight down to 0. So it's not the death, it's not the case rate that we should consistently watch. It's the death rate. I mean, you could have every single citizen of the UK get infected within 24 hours of this virus. But if none of them die, that's not a loss. That's a huge win. But the other thing is, my second line of thought when it comes to the Orwellian methods that the government has used, it's not really a matter for me. It's not a matter of being surprised at them using these very over-the-top technocrat, bureaucrat methods of trying to handle a virus. I think my surprise, in a way, comes more down to the fact that people mistake the government acting Orwellian for the government acting incompetent. Because I think the manipulation comes more down to the media when it comes to how people view COVID-19. But I think the handling of COVID-19, they are, let's not sugarcoat it. These are very Orwellian methods of handling a virus. But I think we need to remember the important thing that while these are Orwellian methods of handling the virus, I don't think it's because the government has decided to become Orwellian. I think it's because the government is completely incompetent. I genuinely think that it is just down to them being completely incompetent, and the only means they can conceive of is, in order to fight a virus, we have to go for anti-liberal methods. And I think it's just down to sheer lack of critical thinking skills and complete bumbling actions of the government itself. So when it comes to the way the public view COVID-19, the media is to blame for the very dystopian, very sort of all hope is lost mentality that it gives to people. And I think when it comes to the official handling of the virus, I think that's down to the government having no critical thinking skills and having no ability to really be competent in any format. I mean,
and perhaps therefore it's been done in this way in order to limit the damage and ensure that responsibility is shared as opposed to focused on the government.
Yeah, shared responsibility, and also the fact that governments very, very rarely like to admit when they've made a mistake. I mean, there were countless examples of countries that have not gone for such dystopia methods. To go back to South Korea, they're a good example. Reason I bring up South Korea, not Sweden, for example, is because when it comes to demographics, they're very similar to us, much more similar than Sweden is. But South Korea went for a method of they quarantine those that are sick and are infected. You can go about your business. If you've got to go to work or if you've got to go to the shops or do whatever, then you can do those things. But if you become infected, then you have to stay home for a period. And because of the way their healthcare system works, it's very much privatized. I think it's about 95% privatized. They were able to have mass production of ventilators and testing kits. And so they were able to test nearly every single member of the country very, very quickly. And they managed to keep the death rate down because of that. I think the only two places that I'm aware of where they had mask mandates was actually on public transport and hospitals. Hospitals I can definitely understand because it's a facility that is built to house vulnerable people. So I mean, in that sort of context, whether we agree or disagree with the mask mandates, that sort of situation of a hospital saying you have to wear a mask if you're coming in here, that makes sense. It makes much more sense than saying you have to wear a mask in a public park. I'm outside, I don't have to. That's ridiculous. And public transport I can understand as well, because let's be honest, public transport is never cleaned properly. I'm more worried about the germs that are on the train than the actual virus itself, funnily enough.
Do you see that the movements out of this period of our history is going to be slow or fast? Will it be stop-start as we've had with the 2 subsequent lockdowns, or will it just be one long climb to freedom again?
I would say at the moment, I would say when it comes to the current plan to ease lockdowns and to permit more freedoms, I think that's going to go as smoothly as it has been going. I think it should move a bit faster, but rather the current speed than much slower would be. But at the same time, that is something that I worry about, because I kind of worry that we're going to end up in another lockdown around the time of winter.
Yeah, I agree.
I think the only reason I worry about that is because I don't think the vast majority of people have come to the realization that we are going to just have to swallow our pride and say we're going to have to live with the virus. It's not going to go anywhere. It's because it evolves just like most viruses do. It mutates into new strands. So even if we have a herd immunity of the current variant that is sweeping most of the world, that doesn't mean that other variants aren't going to mutate. And so what I'm worried about is the idea of a new variant coming, and then people, instead of coming to the realization that, okay, we're just going to have to live with this, because we can't get rid of this virus. It's not going anywhere, because viruses mutate. So we may win against one variant, but we may not anticipate another one coming about. And I worry that people are going to not take that position and instead think, oh, well, a new variant has come out. We need to wait for the vaccine that works against this one, so we better lock down until then. And so I think in terms of the current, where we currently are, I think the easing of lockdown is going to go as planned, and it's going to go as smoothly as it has gone so far. But I think when it comes to winter, I think the public and the government's reaction to any new variant around winter, I think that is going to ultimately determine how we handle this in the long run. If we resort back to a lockdown, I think we can expect this to go on for years and years and years, because we'll just have to wait for the reality to come tumbling down and hitting everyone on the head all at once, saying, okay, yeah, we've just got to accept that this is here. It's not going to go anywhere. It may resort to things like shots every year, but even if it comes to that sort of situation, I'm not very theistic, but it's the one time I will say I'm praying that people come to that realization when shots come out and decide we can't lock down during the periods where shots aren't available. We just have to, we basically just have to, it's a bad term to use, but we just have to grow up and accept that, look, this is a new virus. It's not going anywhere. There are going to be new variants. We've just got to try to, not lose our minds completely. Let's try to act like, let's try to remember what critical thinking skills are, please, for the love of God.
One very important piece of information that people don't take into consideration is that we're not just up against COVID-19, we're up against COVID-18, 17, 16, 15, 14, 13, and all of the other coronaviruses that occurred seasonally before that. And that leads us on to the latest in COVID developments. According to Worldometers, yesterday, which is the 11th of April, saw just 1,730 new cases. That's the lowest level since September the 2nd. 270,659 active cases. That's the lowest level since October the 10th. And just 7 deaths attributed to COVID-19. That's the lowest level since September the 11th. Now, we've seen today, obviously, it's the first day, non-essential shops and pubs and hairdressers and all sorts of being granted limited freedoms again. Do you think that the lockdown is being eased far too slowly in light of those figures, which are admittedly inflated based on the fact of what we were just saying, that there are attributions within that that are simply false?
Yeah, I do think that we are easing lockdown way too slowly. There's been evidence for months that pubs are one of the less likely places to spread vast numbers of infections among people. And so the idea that pubs have to wait another month to open themselves fully is just ridiculous. I mean, at the same time, I would say, while our vaccine rollout has been surprisingly fast, much faster than the European Union, who have only just started to open the door. We've been down we've walked about 20 miles. They're still trying to open the bloody door. At the same time, though, while the vaccine rollout has been fast, because of the priority process and the you get it when you get it system, I think that's made it so that the rollout isn't as fast as it could have been. We could have had a vaccine rollout system that would have made it so that we could have there would have been political arguments to ease the lockdown. I mean, there's economic and social arguments, but unless politicians think something is viable for them, they're not going to do it, sadly. But if we had a vaccine rollout, say, where if you paid cash in hand, you could skip the queue, for example, or if we decided to take very bold action and decide when it comes to this vaccine, there's going to be no IP. So that way there's large numbers of freedom of entry into the vaccine market and mass production of these vaccines, combined with if you pay, you can skip the queue process. I think we would have had at least double the number of people vaccinated that we currently have. And I think it would have provided, we would have had the social and economic argument for easing the lockdown faster, but also the political pressure would have been there as well to ease it faster. And so really it comes down to one bad decision influencing another decision, which causes more bad decisions to happen, as is with government most of the times. But yeah, ultimately, I do think that we should be easing the lockdown a lot faster, especially because private businesses, they can set their own terms for association. If they decide that, okay, we think we've opened a bit too fast, so we're going to have a wider range of requirements for you to enter our business. They're a private business, that's their property, they can set those terms. If someone doesn't like it, they can go to a business that is more prepared. And in fact, having that sort of decentralized decision making would be better, because then businesses and public buildings could base it more on their own demographics. And so if there's a city in, let's say, in the north, for example, that has a very large demographic of elderly, they could decide that, okay, we're easing lockdown quite fast, but because of the demographics, we're going to have more requirements for entry, because these are the demographics that are more at risk to dying from COVID-19. Whereas if you have a city that is predominantly a student city, it's just full of university and college students, you could expect that in that sort of decentralized format, businesses will decide, well, these are the demographics that are very, very unlikely to have any serious complications from this virus. So we can be a lot more liberal when it comes to our requirements.
The Daily Mail, incidentally, has reported that more than 50% of England's population are in areas where virtually no new COVID cases are there at all. Some 4,307 areas with a total population of 34.5 million have had so few COVID cases that Public Health England has not published their data for a month to protect the identities of the few people with positive tests. Now, we've seen quite a sharp drop in the number of cases, I suppose, But there's a slight little hitch about this, isn't there? Because we talk about positive tests and then we talk about separately positive cases. Do you think it's wrong that positive tests have been equated with positive cases when there is a clear difference between the two?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, especially because we've known since the very beginning of the whole test and trace process that our testing mechanisms cannot make any distinction between COVID-19 and a cold. They are very, very primitive. Not to hammer on about South Korea again, but another reason I think why South Korea is doing so well is because they managed to get a hold of not the COVID-19 virus strand itself, but the strand that turns it into that virus. Apply it to their testing kit, so that way they can actually make that distinction between this person has COVID-19, no, this person just has a runny nose.
Yeah.
and I think that's why their case rates and death rates are a lot more concise. I mean, the last time I checked, they were at about 40,000 cases in total, about 38,000 people recovered, and about 400 deaths. And so, it just goes back to that whole thing about decentralization and decentralization and privatization. There was mass production of testing kits with that ability to make that distinction. And there was, and that made it so that you could, because you could make that distinction, you weren't working the public into a frenzy, into a state of fear. And so, yeah, I do think it is wrong to equate a positive test with a positive case. There might have been an argument for it if our testing abilities were much more advanced, but they are very, very primitive. So trying to state that they are one and the same, it's a very a slippery position to put yourself in.
Did you go out to the pub earlier today? Did you go out for a pint?
Not yet. No, I'm waiting till Friday.
I'm going to wait until they allow people indoors because it's still far too cold. Right. Well, it's been excellent having you on here, Josh. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
Now we go over to me for my campaign diary yet again.
Hello there, you join me for another sunny walk in Lichfield and in semi-freedom, because this is the first time in which pubs and restaurants have been open for outside purposes. I don't have too much time to spare for this week's update, but I'm just going to show you a clip of the Cross City line which runs from Lichfield to Redditch, and I'm pledging in this election to try and extend that line more towards Derby, because as we touched upon last week, the decline of businesses, there is I suppose an industrial estate of sorts up at Fradley Park, which that railway line brushes past, so it might be good for jobs in the future. I definitely think it's something that ought to be considered. I'm also going to show you a clip of the Lichfield Recycling Centre, and the Labour candidate in the ward that I'm standing in is proposing via a petition to improve the capacity of this facility. And I'm going to show you this clip, and you can judge for yourself whether or not you think any alterations may need to be made towards that facility. Things to do for the rest of the week include doing the leaflet design. I've been speaking to suppliers in this respect, and it's coming out cheaper than what I expected it to be, which is going to be good. That's going to be the major focus for this week. So I'll see you again for another update.